In 2026 and 2027, horror fans are going to have a lot to play. Big franchises are coming back, indie horror keeps getting stranger, and some upcoming titles already have enough gameplay and atmosphere to start looking genuinely promising. So today, we've got 15 upcoming horror games that look really good. Let's get started. Psycho Dead. There's something about low-budget looking horror games that can end up being way creepier than the big cinematic ones, and Psycho Dead already gives off that kind of vibe. Everything looks grimy, unsettling, and weirdly uncomfortable in a good way. It really feels like one of those old-school psychological horror games where you never fully relax. But what I like is that the gameplay doesn't seem to rely on non-stop jump scares. It actually looks more focused on tension, exploration, and resource management, kind of like Resident Evil, but with psychic abilities mixed into the gameplay. Instead of just running and hiding the whole time, it seems like there's a balance between survival, exploration, and using your abilities carefully while dealing with whatever nightmare is going on around you.
What's going on? Why can't I remember anything?
We need to get out of here together, but we'll have to rely on your powers.
Come with me, Alexia. Your family is waiting for you.
Where am I? And what happened
here? Once we're out of here, I promise to explain everything you want to know.
Next, we have Rules of Engagement. This is one of those horror games where the setup alone instantly grabs your attention. Mixing military themes with psychological horror is not something you see that often, and honestly, it already gives the game a different kind of vibe right away. From the footage so far, this doesn't look like traditional survival horror. The tension seems to come more from uncertainty, pressure, and never fully understanding what kind of situation you've stepped into. It has that feeling where something is clearly wrong, but you're still trying to figure out exactly how bad things really are. The gameplay also doesn't seem to make the player completely helpless. There appears to be a more tactical side to combat and exploration, which can actually make horror more intense when it's handled well. Having weapons or tools doesn't always make things safer.
Show me how you hunt, Aiden Lynch.
It's actually kind of surprising that it took this long for Hellraiser to get a real horror game adaptation. The series already has everything that works perfectly for horror games: disturbing creatures, psychological horror, body horror, and villains that feel genuinely unsettling. A big reason people are interested in this project is because Clive Barker is directly involved, which already gives fans a lot more confidence compared to most licensed horror games. The game looks way more like a survival horror experience than just a gore showcase. It's first-person, there's combat, exploration, resource management, and even puzzle solving. You'll be fighting cultists, twisted creatures, and Cenobites while using weapons and powers tied to the puzzle box itself. Some enemies you can fight, others look more like situations where running or surviving is the better option. Last Paradise already looks pretty different from your typical zombie game. Instead of going all in on fast combat and non-stop action, this one takes a much slower and more survival-focused approach. Set in a zombie-infested version of Seoul, the game seems more interested in tension, careful planning, and simply making it through another day alive. A lot of the gameplay seems built around scavenging, sneaking through buildings, managing supplies, and constantly deciding how much risk you're willing to take before heading back out again. It's less about mowing down zombies and more about trying not to make a bad situation even worse. The game is also fully multiplayer, which probably makes things even more stressful. You're already trying to avoid infected and hold on to your resources, then suddenly another group of players shows up and completely changes the situation. The thing about Silent Hill Townfall is that it doesn't look like it's trying to do the exact same thing as the older games, and that's probably a good thing. This game is going with a first-person style and takes place on a foggy Scottish island, which already gives it a pretty unsettling atmosphere. It also seems way more survival-focused than some people probably expected. You've got combat, stealth, limited resources, and this strange CRTV device that feels like a new spin on the classic radio mechanic from older Silent Hill games. But even with the new ideas, the game still feels very much like Silent Hill. The environments look strange, unsettling, and wrong in that psychological horror kind of way, where the atmosphere gets to you before anything even attacks.
I keep trying to fix what happened. But no matter what I do,
you can't fix it. It doesn't let us change things. You did what you did.
Michael Myers coming back in video game form really isn't that surprising, but Halloween looks like it knows exactly what kind of horror setup works for this franchise. This one goes for 1 versus 4 asymmetrical multiplayer, with one player stepping into the role of Michael Myers, while everyone else plays as civilians trying to survive the night in Haddonfield. But staying alive isn't just about hiding somewhere and waiting for the match to end. Players are warning residents, rescuing survivors, gathering supplies, and trying to get the authorities involved while Michael is actively hunting them down. That setup fits Halloween pretty well, because Michael isn't the kind of killer built around flashy powers or non-stop chaos. He's scary because he stalks, tracks, and slowly builds pressure until people start panicking.
Perhaps not even human. 15 years later, he returned home. But what happened that night was only the beginning. It wasn't just a killing spree, it was a reckoning.
Whoa, calm down. He was going for me to... Come on, we have to go.
No. You can't stop him. You can't reason with him. You can't kill the boogeyman.
Lila needs me, man.
Agni Village of Calamity already feels different from most horror games simply because it pulls from Indonesian horror and folklore instead of the usual Western settings. That alone gives the atmosphere a much more unfamiliar and unsettling feeling. From the gameplay shown so far, the game leans into classic survival horror with exploration, combat, puzzles, and a mysterious village that slowly reveals more of what's actually going on. The pacing looks slower and more focused on tension, where moving forward means carefully exploring dangerous areas and trying to understand whatever nightmare is hiding there. The game's supernatural elements seem pretty strong, and that's probably where most of the horror will come from. When horror games tap into mythology and introduce creatures people aren't already familiar with, the whole experience naturally feels a lot creepier. The Fading of Nicole Wilson already has a pretty strong setup for a horror game. You play as a teenager named Britt, who takes a ghost hunting job at an abandoned hotel, trying to make a name for herself. Which sounds manageable, right up until the investigation starts turning into something a lot darker. And if the hotel sounds familiar, yeah, this is connected to the suicide of Rachel Foster. The game seems way more focused on atmosphere, exploration, puzzles, and investigation than non-stop chase sequences or loud jump scares. You're walking through abandoned hallways with ghost hunting equipment, searching for clues, solving environmental puzzles, and slowly figuring out what happened inside the Timberline Hotel. The binaural audio stuff also sounds pretty interesting because the developers seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on 3D sound design and immersion.
Onto a TV show is my dream.
Welcome aboard. You'll be my paranormal field investigator while I'm stuck here at the hospital. Don't let the ghosts of the Timberline snatch you away.
All right, let's give people the show they want. Can you speak with ghosts? I seriously need them to stop rearranging my sock drawer.
I can barely understand the living. The dead are way beyond my linguistic skills.
You and me both. Pretty dark in here.
Supreme Experiment looks like it's trying to mix sci-fi horror, immersive sim ideas, and survival gameplay into one really strange package. The setup takes place in a future where humanity abandoned the lower world and left machines behind to run everything, only for those machines to eventually evolve into their own societies and cults. Gameplay sounds built around first-person combat, exploration, hacking systems, survival mechanics, and interacting with this giant, hostile machine world. From the footage so far, it looks less like a fast shooter and more like the type of game where you're carefully moving through dangerous areas, trying to understand how everything works before things go wrong. The art direction also does a lot of heavy lifting here. The robot designs, ruined industrial environments, and machine cult aesthetic already make it stand out pretty fast.
Years ago, humans moved up into those huge, ugly towers and left the machines behind to run things for them. Left alone for a century, the machines evolved in ways no one could predict.
With trepidation. This place, wrong. This place, not right.
You say that about every place.
With insistence, wrong. Smell wrong. Smell bad.
Smells the same to
With
me.
urgency, move. Now under, hide.
Okay. If this
With
isn't
growing
covered...
impatience, be quiet.
Animal Use Protocol already has a setup that's pretty hard to ignore. You're playing as Pen, a hyper-intelligent chimpanzee trying to escape a massive research facility after everything inside starts falling apart. And right away, that gives the game a very different identity from your usual horror setup. No haunted house, no small-town mystery, just an escaped lab chimp trying to survive inside a place that clearly stopped following safety regulations a long time ago. Gameplay leans into first-person survival horror with scavenging, stealth, crafting, puzzles, and a decent amount of environmental interaction. There's also a gravity manipulation tool that looks like a big part of how you solve problems and defend yourself, which adds a little immersive sim flavor to the whole thing. The Brotherhood usually does strong atmosphere work, and from what they've shown so far, the industrial sci-fi setting already looks pretty solid.
Did you forget what happened on that night in this city? Oh, but this place remembers, and so do I.
Point looks very aimed at people who miss older survival horror games without wanting a straight copy of them. You play as Lyra, a former rock musician returning to Ashen Point after getting a message tied to her missing bandmate, and the isolated island setting immediately gives the story a strong psychological horror setup. The gameplay goes for slower survival horror pacing with exploration, puzzles, combat, and resource management playing a pretty big role. The fixed camera presentation and classic structure are clearly intentional, but it doesn't seem like it's relying on nostalgia alone. The island environments, foggy locations, and music angle help it carve out its own identity a bit more. And if you're into horror games that reward careful exploration instead of non-stop action, this one already has a pretty good hook. MINSK looks like the kind of horror game that's trying to make the environment itself feel oppressive instead of relying on constant jump scares. The game takes place in a ruined, post-Soviet city filled with strange anomalies, hostile creatures, and abandoned underground areas, and the whole setting already has a pretty strong identity. Gameplay mixes exploration, shooting, scavenging, stealth, and survival mechanics while you move through these dangerous zones trying to uncover what happened to the city. Resources look limited, enemies seem aggressive, and a lot of the tension comes from simply pushing deeper into areas that clearly do not want you there. The visual style also helps a lot. Dark tunnels, damaged buildings, heavy fog, flickering lights, all of it gives the game a very dense atmosphere without trying too hard to be cinematic. State of Decay 3 already has a pretty good hook just from the idea of taking the survival systems from the earlier games and pushing them into a bigger, modern open world. The series was always less about a single scripted story and more about surviving long enough to build an actual community during a zombie outbreak. That setup still seems to be the focus here, just on a much larger scale. The gameplay is expected to keep the mix of scavenging, base building, exploration, permadeath systems, and zombie survival combat the series is known for. But from what Undead Labs has talked about so far, this one seems way more ambitious technically, especially with world detail, enemy behavior, and long-term survival systems. The second game already had moments where everything could fall apart because of one bad decision, and State of Decay 3 looks like it wants to push that survival sandbox even further.
Greater than the fear and death that surrounded us. We found hope in each other.
Help! I'm surrounded. They're everywhere. There's way more than I was expecting.
And even if we bought the other survivors just one more day, the sacrifice would be worth it. It would always be worth it.
Resonant Q already looks pretty different from most horror games, just because of how much it leans into music and audio as part of the experience. The game follows a music producer trapped inside a distorted, dreamlike reality, where sound itself seems tied to the world around you. And the whole setup gives it a much stranger atmosphere than the usual abandoned hospital or haunted house approach. The gameplay mixes first-person exploration, puzzles, survival mechanics, and psychological horror while using sound cues and environmental audio as a major part of progression. From what they've shown so far, it seems very focused on immersion and tension rather than combat-heavy gameplay. Visually, it also has a pretty distinct style. The shifting environments, surreal spaces, and music-driven presentation help it stand out really quickly compared to a lot of indie horror games coming out right now. OD is probably one of the easiest horror games to be curious about right now, simply because almost nobody fully knows what the game actually is yet. It's the new horror project from Hideo Kojima, alongside filmmaker Jordan Peele, and just that combination alone already gives the game a very different kind of attention compared to most horror announcements. The early footage focused heavily on facial animation, dialogue delivery, and uncomfortable psychological horror imagery instead of traditional gameplay reveals. So right now, a lot of the interest comes from the tone and presentation. Kojima also described it as something that blends film and games in a new way, which honestly could mean almost anything coming from him. But that mystery is also part of why people are paying attention to it.